Martina Meadows. The August sun had warmed up Atlanta to over 90 degrees that Sunday, so the Meadows family decided to head to the pool at their apartment complex to cool off a bit. As Martina approached the gate surrounding the pool, she thought she recognized a familiar figure, sunbathing on a sun lounger at the far end of the fence. "John, can you keep an eye on Kyle for a bit? I'll go talk to Claire." "Of course," he answered cheerfully. "Come on, baby, let's play. Horse and ride her." While father and son splashed noisily in the water, Martina walked around the pool to Claire Garrison. Not only were the young women friends, but they both worked at Roman 3 Insights, a fast-growing internet consulting firm. When she approached the lounge, she saw that Claire was wearing a thong swimsuit. The sun shining on her colleagues' well-oiled thighs drew the eye like a beacon. Martina looked awkwardly at her own swimsuit, although she also had a separate one. It was much more modest than Claire's. As usual, she thought sarcastically. "Hey, Claire, are you hooking daddies?" Martina shouted, sitting down on a chair next to the blonde. Claire turned on her side when she heard a familiar voice. "No, I'm just sunbathing," she answered, not at all offended by her friend's joke. After that, the women began chatting about everyday topics, but when the conversation turned to work, Claire's expression suddenly became serious. "Can you keep secrets?" she asked in a low voice. Intrigued, Martina answered just as quietly, "Certainly." Claire leaned closer. "I'm having an affair," she admitted in a whisper. Martina recoiled in surprise. "Seriously? Are you kidding?" "No, I swear, this has been going on for a couple of months now, and I can't wait to tell someone." Still doubting Claire's sincerity, Martina leaned closer to her. "Friend, who is this guy?" she demanded. "You have to promise not to tell anyone," Claire insisted. "Of course you know you can trust me. So who is it?" Claire's face lit up with a sly smile. "This is Ivan. Ivan and Jersel's our boss. Now I know for sure that you are lying." "Quiet." Claire shushed her sharply. "I don't want anyone to hear. I can't believe you're sleeping with it. The Iceman." The women began to whisper animatedly until John's shout interrupted them. "Martina, are you going to swim? Kyle is starting to get tired." Martina looked at her watch and was surprised to see how long she and Claire had already been gossiping. "Sorry, darling," she shouted. "We got a little carried away. I'll come now." As Claire stood up to return to her family, she grabbed her wrist. "Remember," she said sternly, "not a word about this to anyone." Martina drew a cross across her chest with her finger, indicating her promise, and then hurried back to John and Kyle. "What were you talking about so enthusiastically? Ask John. You are so immersed in the conversation." "Nothing important," Martina waved it off. "Just ordinary office conversations." Later, after the three of them had showered to remove the chlorine from the pool, Martina began preparing an early dinner. Luckily, there were leftovers for dinner, because her mind clearly wasn't focused on cooking. "I can't believe Claire is having an affair at work, and with Ivan, of all people. The Iceman, who would have thought?" As she heated up the food, she couldn't help but think about her boss. Ivan and Jersel burst onto the scene as an internet prodigy. Known for his sarcastic jokes as much as his industry insights, he quickly earned a reputation as the bad boy of the tech world. His insightful article on the rise of internet influencers caught the attention of digital players, and he quickly capitalized on his sudden fame by launching a highly successful consulting business, Roman 3 Insights. Despite his reputation for being cold and demanding, he quickly assembled a team of bright young minds who helped him secure contracts with major industry players. But after a year in his team, Martina found it hard to believe that Ivan and Jersel was having an affair in the office. Of course, there were many young and attractive women in his company, but until now, Martina had not heard any rumors about it, at least until today. She knew that Ivan was married and believed that he was faithful to his wife Nadia. But thinking about it now, Martina realized that she didn't have a clear idea of what Nadia and Jersel looked like. She had seen this woman only briefly at some corporate dinner, and then it seemed to her that the wife looked older than her husband. But the truth is that that evening Martina gave all her attention to Ivan. After all, her boss was tall and slender with black hair and a thin mustache that made him look both sophisticated and cunning. With his industry bad boy reputation and icy office demeanor, he was both a mysterious and magnetic figure. Now, based on what Claire had just told her, it appeared that there was more fire beneath that cold surface than Martina had imagined, and the fact that it was Claire who was able to melt this icy exterior made Ivan even more excited. I wonder if I could have gotten his attention if I knew he was available, she thought. Then she remembered the swimsuit she wore today. She shook her head. No, not like that. Her husband, however, seemed to be more positive about her poolside appearance. After they put Kyle to bed, John tried to show some romance. Martina quickly stopped this. I have to get up early for work tomorrow, she explained, maybe later in the week. Despite his disappointment, Martina's husband quickly fell asleep. It was much more difficult for her. Why did Ivan choose Claire? She asked herself. But the answer seemed obvious. It's because of her big breasts that she always puts on display. Martina thought disdainfully, again wishing she had more than a B-cup. Isn't that what every man wants? Why should Ivan and Jersel be any different? With this sad thought, the young woman finally fell asleep. The next morning, while John was getting Kyle ready for school, Martina stood in front of the mirror and studied herself. I may not have big breasts, but I have many other advantages. For example, she was taller than Claire, and her long legs were definitely slimmer. Moreover, they smoothly turned into rounded hips, which always attracted male attention. I'm not ugly, she thought defiantly. As she put on her clothes, she glanced at the practical shoes she was about to wear and thought about it. They're not doing my legs or ass any favors, she decided. Returning to the closet, she pulled out a pair of moderate heels. I can't go straight from Mary Jane's to stilettos or people will notice, but I can start moving in the right direction. Satisfied with the extra definition the heels gave to her calves, she turned to the makeup mirror. As she was about to pull her hair into the businesslike bun she usually wore, she stopped. I don't want to look businesslike. I want to look sexy. She quickly combed her dark brown locks and let them fall over her shoulders like dark chocolate. I can go back to my old maid's hair when I'm 80. Looking at herself from this new perspective, Martina began to think about other changes she could make. But assessing herself in the mirror, she decided not to rush. That's enough for the first day. I don't want to overdo it. It never occurred to her to think about what the next steps might be or to ask herself where they might lead. As she went into the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, John noticed a change in her appearance. Hey, you let your hair down, honey? It suits you. She thanked him for the compliment, pleased that her changes were noticeable. But the fact that her husband noticed her new image caused her internal anxiety. She chided herself. See, you gotta take it slow, girl. You can't make too many changes at once, or John will start asking awkward questions. Over the next few weeks, Martina continued her transformation in slow, subtle steps. She gradually increased the amount of makeup, highlighting her eyes, highlighting her cheekbones, with blush, and wearing a darker shade of lipstick. During a trip to the mall, she bought several underwire and push-up bras. I may not compare to you in the boob department, Claire, but I can make what I have look more noticeable. To draw more attention to her legs, she continued to increase the height of the heels she wore. She also began wearing darker stockings, sometimes with subtle patterns. At the same time, she began to shorten her skirts, folding them in at the waist. Pantsuits virtually disappeared from her wardrobe, giving way to wrap dresses and split skirts that offered tantalizing glimpses of her thighs. As her transformation continued, Martina began to make more efforts to attract the attention of Ivan and Jersel. In meetings, she kept her attention on the boss, no matter who was speaking. Whenever he looked in her direction, she crossed her legs, hoping he would notice. At lunch or when leaving home, she always passed by his office, and during individual meetings with him, she sat so that her breasts were pushed forward and her legs were open so that he could get a good look at her slit skirts. But as the weeks passed, Martina became increasingly frustrated. If Operation Ivan had any effect on the boss, she didn't see it. He was busy all the time, but others definitely noticed. Martina had just finished checking her makeup in the dressing room mirror when a clearly angry Claire Garrison stormed in. "What the hell are you doing, Martina?" she hissed. Martina looked at her calmly. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play games with me. I saw how you dress and how you behave with Ivan. You must back off. He's mine and I won't let him go." Martina looked at the angry woman indifferently. "Then you have nothing to worry about, so get out of my way." For a moment, it looked like Claire might physically attack her, but the sound of approaching footsteps outside the ladies' room door stopped her. Claire gave her ex-friend a menacing look, then turned and walked out. Martina calmly turned to the mirror to check her appearance one more time before leaving, a slight smile playing on her lips. 2 weeks later, at the next meeting, Ivan made an announcement that took both women by surprise. "We have an opportunity next week to make a proposal to a potential client in Chicago. I'll fly there on Monday, Martina. I want you to help me." All details of the trip can be obtained from my secretary. Martina was stunned, but managed to remain calm. Claire, however, could not hide her emotions. "But Ivan, I usually go with you to such meetings," she exclaimed. "True," he replied, "but I think it's important that other team members can observe and contribute." Martina performed well in analytical work. Now she needs to master marketing too. He looked intently at Claire. "Cross-training is very important in an organization like ours. Don't you agree, Claire?" She nodded reluctantly, not wanting to look at either her boss or her rival. Martina returned to her office as if on a cloud. "It's happening, God. I didn't think he noticed me. But apparently he did." "Looks like you're not the only one who can melt the Iceman, Claire." A minute later, doubts came over her again. What if I made all this up? What if for Ivan, this is just another business trip? Nothing more. And how should I behave in Chicago? What should I say? All weekend, excitement and anxiety fought in her soul until even John noticed. When he asked about this, Martina honestly admitted that she was nervous about the upcoming trip, but did not say anything unnecessary. This will be my first time alone with him, and I don't know how to behave. "You can do it, darling," John tried to support her. "You are smart and quick-witted. You know your business. I have confidence in you. And remember, Ivan would not have invited you if he was not confident in your abilities. Just follow your instincts, and everything will be fine." After hugging him for his comforting words, she went into the bedroom to start packing her things. Looking through her things, she made a decision. Ivan wants me to be myself, otherwise he wouldn't have asked me to go. And he wants me to look the way I look in the office lately, and not the way I used to. So that's what he'll get with the new Martina. Having made her choice, she began packing her new wardrobe into her bag, from underwear to outerwear to the highest heels she owned. She even put several intimate items of clothing in there that John had never seen. As they say, either do it big or don't do it at all. Well, this girl is going to do it big. Just after lunch on Monday, Ivan and Martina flew from Hartsfeld to the Windy City. Although the flight to O'Hare took less than 2 hours, Ivan was fanatical about preparation, and so they managed to check into Lakeview rooms at the Peninsula by the end of the day. During the taxi ride, Ivan told Martina that he had already ordered dinner for the two of them. The prospect of dinner for two with Ivan delighted her. Given that she had plenty of time to prepare, she paid special attention to her hair and makeup. When she was happy with the result, she wore her tightest dress and highest heels for the evening. When he came down to the lobby to meet her, she was already waiting, carefully positioned against a backdrop of tropical plants. The restaurant he chose in the Loop was both romantic and expensive, but to Martina's chagrin, Ivan limited their dinner to work-related topics only. Doubts began to flare up again. Did I misunderstand the whole situation? Maybe for Ivan this is just another business trip, and nothing more. When they returned to the hotel after dinner, her boss surprised her again. "If you want to discuss anything else this evening, give me an hour to check my email, and then come to my room. I'll leave the door open for you." Once in her room, Martina again plunged into doubt. What should I do now? Does he want me to bring my laptop and watch the presentation again? Or does he want to be alone with me? I can't help but come. What does he really want? She took off the elegant dress she had worn for dinner and began to put on the only casual outfit she had brought with her. Suddenly she remembered how Claire had threatened her in the toilet. She'll be delighted if I save her now, she thought, and her resolve strengthened. As they say, do it big or don't do it at all, she chided her reflection in the mirror. She quickly stripped naked, then walked to the bathroom mirror. There she reapplied her makeup and carefully applied perfume in strategic places. Satisfied, she took out from her suitcase the peignoir she had bought especially for this trip. When she put it on, it hung on thin straps and went down to her ankles. The silky fabric was completely black, but so transparent that it enveloped her figure like smoke. If that doesn't turn him on, I don't know what will. Checking the time, she was surprised to see that almost an hour had passed. She put on the terry robe, provided by the hotel, so as not to walk down the hallway almost naked. As a finishing touch, she put her stilettos back on. Then she hurried to Ivan's room. In front of his door, she took a deep breath, knocked, and entered. Closing the door behind her, she turned around and saw her boss, sitting on the edge of the bed. He was also wearing a hotel robe. He silently watched her entrance. Her heart was pounding wildly in her chest. Big, she repeated to herself one last time, and allowed the robe to slide off her shoulders, revealing her body shrouded in a translucent peignoir. Now everything depended on him. He looked at her intently, then beckoned her with his hand. When she stood in front of him, he spread his knees, revealing that he was completely naked under the robe. She felt a surge of triumph. He wants it. He wants me. He was waiting for me to make this first move. Looking into her eyes, he nodded his head down, and she immediately understood what he needed. She knelt down in front of him and began to pleasure him. God, I've never been so horny in my life. She completely surrendered to her occupation and suddenly felt his hands under her armpits. Before she had time to think that she had done something wrong, he picked her up and, leaning back on the bed, pulled her on top of him. "Dammy," he ordered in an authoritative voice. Gleefully obeying, she hurriedly moved towards his hips. Closing her eyes, she felt a rush of emotion. It was a relief to know that he had wanted her all along, mixed with pride that her slow, seductive tactics had worked. Of all the women in the office, she deserves the attention of this main bad guy. At that moment, she wanted Claire to see her and know about Martinez's triumph. "Don't play games you can't win, bitch," she rejoiced. But most of all, she felt animal lust. John Meadows. It was a summer of discontent for John. Every week, some small irritation arose that ate away at his enjoyment of life. To begin with, problems arose at the bank where he was a branch manager. Management demanded staff reductions from all departments. Bank branches, which already had a small staff, were no exception. But of course, there was no concomitant reduction in working hours, so those who remained had to work for two. John was not only busier than ever, but he also lost several good employees due to turnover. And of course, there was his home life. With the arrival of autumn, Martinez seemed more and more distracted, immersed in her own world. When he asked her about it, she brushed off his concerns. "There's just a lot going on at work. You know how it goes. Everything will be settled soon." He had hoped after their conversation, but little had changed. If anything had changed, her workload only seemed to increase. Now she often stayed late at work and often went to the office on weekends. "I thought we were supposed to be partners," he grumbled to himself. "I don't mind taking on more household chores, but I feel like I'm working full-time in a bank and full-time as a housewife." As he expressed his feelings to Martina, she harshly reminded him of what she had been through when John was getting his MBA. He had to admit that there was a lot of truth in her words. It was a difficult time for her, with him working during the day and studying in the evenings. He was the absentee husband then. Ashamed, he tried to change his attitude, hoping that the tension at her job would ease. Instead, it only intensified. Suddenly, she began traveling frequently on business trips, leaving for 2 or 3 days at a time. And when she was home, the routine of late nights and weekend work continued. Luckily, John's work schedule was flexible enough to allow him to take on most of the responsibility for their son. John had to be at the bank when it opened, but he could drive Kyle to school early in the morning and still make it to the branch on time. Likewise, he arranged for the deputy manager to close the bank at the end of the day. This allowed him to pick up Kyle after school and bring him home. There he could remotely perform daily balance reconciliation. But the whole schedule only worked if everything went according to plan. Sometimes this fails. One Monday, while Martina was away on a business trip for a week, Kyle brought home a note announcing that the school would be closed for teacher training on Thursday and Friday. John was in a bind. He had to be at work, but he didn't have anyone to watch Kyle all day. He didn't want to call in sick. That would have been a bad example for his employees. With no options, John brought his son to the bank and placed him in an empty office with enough books, toys, and pencils to keep him occupied, or so he hoped. Shortly after lunch, John looked up and saw an attractive young woman with her son in the bank. Everyone else was busy, so John went out to try and help her. "I'm Allison King, and this is my son Stevie," she introduced herself. "I have a problem with your bank credit card. Can you help?" John offered to do his best. When he walked her into his office, she brought her son with her. "I hope you don't mind. It's Stevie's day off from school today, and I don't have anyone to babysit him." John looked at her more closely. "Does your son study at West Park Elementary School?" he asked. When she nodded, he explained, "I thought you looked familiar. My son Kyle studies there too." He pointed to the window overlooking the adjacent office, where Kyle could be seen playing. "I'm in the same position as you," he laughed. "Looks like we're both single parents," she replied. "Well, I'm not alone, but my wife travels a lot, and right now she's out of town. So you could say I'm next to a single parent." Then a thought struck him. "Look, it might take a little time to sort out your credit card problem. Do you think Stevie would be interested in playing with Kyle?" She immediately agreed, and they both took Stevie into the next office. "Hey, Kyle," John asked, "do you want to play with the new?" "Hey, Stevie," Kyle interrupted with a smile, and Stevie immediately replied, "Hi, Kyle." With these words, both boys plopped down on the carpet and began to talk. John smiled at Stevie's mother. "Well, that was easy. They seem to be fine, so let's see if we can solve your problem." Resolving her issue took longer than he expected, but eventually John was able to find the right people and fix the problem. Allison was extremely grateful. These are not the best times, so solving this problem will really help. "I'm glad I could help a good client," John replied. "Now let's see if these two destroyed the office." When they looked into the room, they were pleased that there were no signs of destruction. Instead, the two boys sat at the table, drawing monsters with markers on the printer paper John had found earlier. Allison told Stevie it was time to leave, and they were greeted by a chorus of, "Ah, can we play some more?" Allison turned to John with a smile. "They seem to get along well," she said. As she collected the paper scattered around the room, she looked at John again and stood up. "Listen, you will have to face the same problem again tomorrow, and I don't work on Fridays. Maybe Kyle will come to our townhouse to play. I could look after both of them, and from the looks of it, they would really like to spend more time together." John looked at the boys and then at Allison. He didn't know her that well, but she seemed like a caring mother. "And I'm in a desperate situation," he admitted to himself. "Are you sure this won't cause you any inconvenience?" he asked politely. She smiled at him. "Let's ask the boys." She turned to the children. "Stevie, Kyle, would you like to meet at Stevie's house tomorrow to play?" The shouts of joy that followed her question decided the matter. The next day, John kept a close eye on his smartphone. He asked Allison to contact him immediately if she had any problems with the boys. Although he felt positive feelings towards her, he couldn't stop imagining all kinds of crises that could arise. So when he heard the beep of an incoming text message, John nearly jumped out of his skin. But looking at the phone, he saw that the message was from Martina, who said that she would not return home until Saturday. Damn, he cursed. Again, he was in a bad mood when he went to pick up Kyle from Allison's house after work. But her positive feedback at least eased his feelings of parental guilt. When Kyle whined, "Are we leaving yet, Dad?" John had a brilliant idea. Turning to Allison, he said, "Look, I just found out that Martina isn't coming back until tomorrow, so Kyle and I are single again tonight. Would you and Stevie want to have dinner with us?" He deliberately made the proposal loud enough to make Stevie and Kyle beg, preventing Allison from objecting. "I have a better idea," she suggested. "Instead of choosing a place and going, why don't we just order pizza and have dinner here?" This option was also met with enthusiasm from the children, and John readily agreed. After they ate pizza and the boys went to Stevie's room to play, John sat down in the living room with Allison to relax. "It looks like your wife has a very busy travel schedule," she noted. "Yes, you can say that," he sighed, and suddenly he began to share all the disappointments that had accumulated in him over the past few months. When he realized that he had said too much, he stopped. "Sorry, Allison. I didn't want to bore you with my tale of misfortune. What's your story?" Now, it was Allison's turn to look awkward. As you know, I am a single mother who is trying my best to cope with difficulties. But what I don't usually tell people is that a few years ago, I escaped an abusive marriage and moved here to start a new life. "I'm sorry," John said sympathetically. "It seems like it was pretty hard." "To be honest, it was my fault," she said, which surprised him. "It all happened so slowly that I didn't realize how bad it was until the night he gave me 2 black eyes in front of Stevie for the first time. I knew I had to protect my son and called the police. It was terrible. My ex grabbed a gun and shot one of them. I was so afraid for Stevie. In general, my ex was sent to prison, and he is there for a long time." Seeing the worry on John's face, she quickly added, "But the good news is that he's completely out of my life. We moved here, and now Stevie and I don't have to worry about him." The conversation turned to more mundane topics, and when Allison mentioned something about school, John quickly checked the time. "It's almost time to put Kyle to bed, and probably Stevie too. It's time for us, of course," she said, standing up with him. She then reached out to touch his arm. "Listen, John, if you ever need help with Kyle again, let me know. He and Stevie seem to get along well. If one day you have a problem at work when your wife is not around, can pick him up and look after him until you are free." He looked at her gratefully. "Thank you, Allison. I'll definitely take this into account." He smiled. "And if you have any more problems with credit cards or anything else, let me know." John's life continued fairly normally until 2 weeks later. Suddenly, the slow drip of dysfunction in his life became a torrent. The first sign of the chaos that followed was the appearance of an unexpected guest in his office, Claire Garrison. "Hi, Claire," John said, welcoming her into his office. "What brings you here?" She frowned. "I want to know what you're going to do with your wife." He looked at her in confusion. "With Martina? I don't understand what you mean. Can you really be that blind?" She blurted out, her voice dripping with venom and sarcasm. "She has an affair with Ivan." Her statement stunned John. At that moment, all the questions about Martine's behavior that he had dismissed as self-doubt came back like a powerful blow to the head. His instinctive reaction was denial. "This is madness," he barked. "She doesn't have any affair." Even to him, it sounded unconvincing. He tried again. "How do you know this? What evidence do you have?" Claire rolled her eyes. "God, John, isn't it obvious? Have you noticed how she dresses for work? Split skirts, push-up bras, extra makeup? Do you really think she went into easy girl mode for you? She went into a frenzy. What do you think she actually does when she works at night and on weekends? I can promise you that there is not much work in the office. Right now. And what about all these trips she takes with him? Do you seriously think she isn't in his hotel room every night?" It seemed to him that every question she asked was a blow that went straight to the heart. Fierce and defensive, he tried to go on the offensive. "Why are you here? Claire? Why does this even concern you?" To his surprise, her face turned red and tears began to flow from her eyes. In a voice choked with emotion, she exclaimed, "Because Ivan was mine, and I want him back." Her passion shocked him, and the last thing he wanted was to have a fight with a jealous woman in front of his employees. Jumping up sharply, he told her, "If you have nothing more to say to me, I think it's time for you to leave." She was stunned. "Wait, what are you going to do with all this?" Her simple question hit him hard. "I really don't know," he answered in a muffled voice. Then, trying to pull himself together again, he said firmly, "Goodbye, Claire." She glared at him some more, and then turned around and walked out of the bank. When she left, John leaned back in his chair, the weight of Claire's accusations overwhelming him. He was full of self-loathing. Why didn't I see this? All the signs were there all summer. Other senses competed for his attention. His outrage that Martina might cheat on him was matched by his despair at the thought of losing what he considered a happy marriage. Worry about how this would affect his son was offset by disappointment at what his own life would look like now. And above all this towered the question that Claire posed to him. What should I do now? His first instinct was to immediately confront Martine and demand the truth. But he quickly dismissed this thought. If she's cheating on me, she'll just deny everything. What then? Then another thought came to him. What if Claire is lying? What if this is all some kind of plan on her part against Martine? It's obvious that Claire is consumed with jealousy. If I accuse Martine of cheating, that might be exactly what Claire wants. Of course, Martine couldn't do something like that. Having an affair with the boss, what a cliché. She can't be that stupid. Trying to regain control of himself, he took several deep breaths. The only way to deal with this mess is to start by finding out the truth. Once I know the truth, I can figure out what to do next. He felt himself slipping back into a state of helplessness. But how can I do that? I barely have time to go to work and take care of Kayla. I couldn't spy on her, even if I knew how, and I don't know the detectives. But now that he had recovered a little from the initial shock, he began to think a little more rationally. I may not know any good detectives, but I know someone who might. After graduating from university, John went to business school, and his university friend Max Harrison went to law school. His friend now ran his own law practice in a suburb of Atlanta. John called him, and when Max greeted him with a cheerful voice, John immediately made it clear that he was not calling on friendly business. He quickly explained the situation and outlined his immediate problem. I don't want to make rash decisions just based on the words of a jealous colleague, Max. I need proof. Therefore, I'm looking for a reliable detective agency that can conduct a secret investigation about Martina and her boss, Ivan, and Gersel. Can you recommend someone? Max understood everything immediately. Yes, there are several people whom I trust. They do such things. Let me make a call. I hope one of them can contact you today. And John, I'm so sorry, mate. I hope this is a false alarm. Within an hour, John received a call from Lyman Mazarov, who introduced himself as the head of the Mazarov Inquiries Agency. He sent John the URL of his agency's website and then asked the potential client about his requirements. After John expressed his suspicions about what happened over the summer, Mazarov had a proposal. I understand that you hope for a quick solution to this issue. If so, perhaps we can avoid 24/7 surveillance. If you know your wife's schedule, we can focus on one or two situations that may offer the greatest opportunity for offense. If it passes muster in these cases, your fears may not be justified. That sounds reasonable, Mr. Mazarov. But the most likely possibility would be a meeting in Chicago. She leaves on Monday and will be away until Friday. I think this might suit us, Mazarov thought. In my experience, people tend to let their guard down when they are away from home because they assume that no one knows them there. Does your agency operate in Chicago? John asked skeptically. No, but we have a partnership with an agency there. If you can provide me with details of her trip, we can arrange surveillance upon arrival. Martina always left her travel itinerary for John in case of emergencies, so John was able to pass it on to Mazarov. He also sent him a link to the Roman 13 Insights website, where there were photographs of Ivan and Martina. John could almost hear Mazarov thinking as he looked at the schedule John had provided. After a minute of silence, the detective spoke again. Our best chance is the hotel, and we should aim for the night of their arrival. If they do have a sexual relationship, they will be horny after the flight and want to relieve tension in the privacy of the hotel room. My contacts in Chicago have good relationships with most major hotels. It will cost you a little more convincing money, but I think they will be able to get the video while they are in the room. He paused. Mr. Meadows, there are no guarantees, but my gut says we'll know something by the end of the week. If we don't get anything under these conditions, I think you can relax, and we won't waste any more of your money. How does that sound to you? Sounds good. Okay, one more thing. Max can confirm this, but any video we collect will not be admissible in court. I understand. I just want to know the truth. I think we can do this. Anyway, I'll let you know one way or another as soon as we have something definite. Feeling better that he had taken some positive steps, John now prepared for the evening, trying to act naturally around Martina. But when she texted him that she planned to stay late at work again, John was glad he wouldn't have to test his acting skills. And when she returned to the office on Saturday and Sunday, John focused all his attention on Kayla. The time he spent with his son was both bitter and sweet. I really don't want Kyle to grow up in a broken home, he thought sadly as he played catch with him. As usual, Martina flew to O'Hare on Monday afternoon, so John saw her very little before she left. And it was for the best. His stomach could not stand the strain if he had to interact with her for a long time. On Thursday morning, John received the call he had been dreading from Mazarov. "Mr. Meadows, I'll be frank. Your wife is clearly in an ongoing sexual relationship with her boss Ivan and Jersel. They sleep together all the time on this trip. They didn't even bother to book private rooms." John couldn't help himself and groaned. Ignoring this, Mazarov continued in a businesslike tone. "A courier will be delivered to your office this afternoon. There will be 3 envelopes inside the package. One will contain a flash drive with relevant video from their time spent in the high room. The other will contain a transcript of their conversations in the room in case some of the audio is unintelligible. The third envelope will contain a set of photographs taken from the video." "Now listen to me carefully," the detective continued. "I have 2 very important pieces of advice for you based on many years of experience in this matter. First, do not harm your spouse or her lover under any circumstances. If you do this, I will be obliged to report all my findings and this conversation to the police. This will be considered an intentional act, which will significantly increase the punishment you receive from the law. Do you understand me?" "Yes," John said quietly. "I am not prone to violence, Mr. Mazarov. I promise I won't hurt anyone." "Okay," the detective replied. "Second, I strongly recommend that you look only at the photographs. They have been carefully selected to show your wife and Mr. Ingersoll engaged in sexual activity so that there is no doubt about their identity or actions. If you want, you can also read the transcript of their conversations. Some of them don't matter, and some of them may hurt you, but since it's in text form, it won't have the same emotional impact as a video. I strongly advise you not to watch the video." Mazarov continued. "You have a small child, which means that you will most likely have to continue to interact with your wife in the future for his interests. Video combined with audio creates an emotional experience you won't forget. These experiences will make working together on your son's behalf much more difficult. I hope you will take this advice to heart. I know many people who did not follow this advice and later regretted it. It is in your best interest to move forward, rather than get stuck in anger and painful memories." John took a deep breath. "Thank you, Mr. Mazarov. I promise not to harm anyone, and will consider your second advice. That's all I can ask for, Mr. Meadows. You will find an invoice for our services in the package. Good luck to you." The delivery guy delivered the package almost before John had to leave to pick up Kyle, so he carefully placed it in the passenger seat of his car as if it were a deadly snake that he didn't want to disturb. When father and son returned home, John immediately called Allison King. "Could you pick Kyle up from school tomorrow and keep him at your place for the night? I need to have a serious talk with my wife when she gets back, and I don't want Kyle to hear this." "Oh, John, that sounds alarming. I'm so sorry. As for tomorrow, of course, Kyle can stay with us." "Stevie will be very happy. Just remember to call the school tomorrow morning and let them know that I will be picking up both boys. And John, if there's anything else I can do to help, just tell me. I'll think about you. Thank you, Allison. You are a real savior." After John put Kyle to bed, he returned to the living room and carefully opened the package that contained the remains of his marriage. He immediately noticed a small envelope labeled flash drive and put it aside. He was surprised by the weight of the large envelope marked transcript. He also put that aside. He opened the envelope labeled photos. The photographs fell out of him face down, and when he turned, the stack over his heart sank. He knew what to expect, but now there was no doubt, no room for ambiguity. Shot after shot clearly captured Ivan and Martina in one sexual position after another. Were they trying to act out the whole sex book? John asked himself with disgust, but his contempt could not hide the grief he felt at seeing the woman he loved give herself completely and unrestrainedly to another. When he had scanned the entire collection with dates and times, he tossed the photographs back into the envelope and leaned his head back on the sofa. Sorrow and anger filled his mind. What a fool I was trying to be a good husband to a woman who is so easily ready to sell herself to her boss. Emotionally exhausted, he decided he couldn't take it anymore for today. He took the 3 envelopes to his home office and locked them in his desk so Kyle wouldn't accidentally stumble upon them. It will be hard enough for the poor boy, and even more so to see his mother acting like a prostitute. Having closed all the evidence, John went to the bedroom, turned off the light, and fell on the bed. Despite all the emotions swirling in his mind, he fell asleep within minutes. He woke up early the next morning. Moving almost mechanically, he went through all the morning preparations, then woke Kyle. After making his son's breakfast and packing his lunch, he drove him to school saying only the most necessary words and phrases. He wanted to say something encouraging to Kyle, but he couldn't find the strength to do it. Luckily, telling him he would be spending the night with Stevie was enough to lift Kyle's spirits. After going through his usual morning routine at the bank branch, John remembered to call the school office to let him know that Stevie would be picking up Kyle tomorrow. Later, when a colleague invited John to lunch, he declined, unsure if he could maintain a semblance of normality. After arranging with the employee to close the bank, John left early that day so he could get home in time for Martina's return. Arriving home, he changed into jeans and a casual shirt, took the envelope of photographs from his desk and went into the living room, preparing for the upcoming confrontation. While he waited, he called Max Harrison, but his secretary said that the lawyer was in court and would not return until the end of the day. John left a request for Max to call him as soon as possible. Unusually for her, Martina's flight arrived early, so John didn't have to wait long before she parked the car in their driveway. She was surprised when she entered the house and saw him sitting there. "Did something happen, John?" she asked. He stared at her. "And how?" She saw the expression on his face and turned pale. "What's going on, John? You're scaring me." In response, he took the envelope and threw it on the coffee table in front of her. "Look for yourself." When she opened the clasp, the photographs fell into her lap, and she gasped when she saw them. "How did you get it?" she screamed. "Were you following me? Damn it, Martina, is that all you can say? No guilt, no excuses, no apologies, nothing. Where are your sorry for having sex with your boss all these weeks? Where is it's not what it seems or it doesn't mean anything." She looked at him in silence for a few moments, then sighed heavily. Walking over to her suitcase, she pulled out her own envelope and handed it to him. "I wasn't going to do this now, but apparently there's no point in waiting, right?" "What is this?" he asked, confused. "This is your copy of my divorce petition and proposed financial agreement. Now that you know everything, I will instruct my lawyer to file the papers with the court on Monday morning. You need to take this to your lawyer and discuss it, and let me know what you think. I believe you will find this proposal extremely fair." "Are you divorcing me?" John said stupidly. "But you're the one who's cheating." "It is what it is, John. Obviously, either party can divorce the other at any time and for any reason. Regardless of what your peeping Tom discovered, I'm the one leaving this marriage. And although I did not plan to discuss my reasons, it is obvious that feelings arose between Ivan and me. I'm sorry you found out this way, but it doesn't change the outcome." His greatest fear surfaced. "If you think for even a second that you're going to take Kyle away from me, stop it, John. I told you I'm trying to be as fair to you as possible. As Kyle's mother, I could easily have him full-time, but I'm not going to do that. If you read these papers, you will see that I am asking for joint custody, okay?" Without waiting for an answer, she stood up. "I think it's better for me not to stay here today under such circumstances." With a grin on her lips, she gathered up the photos, stuffed them back into the envelope, and tossed it into John's lap. "They didn't help you much, did they? I hope you didn't pay too much for them." With these words, she left the house with a suitcase, and a minute later, John heard her car driving away. He sank helplessly onto the sofa, stunned by this turn of events. "This is not what I expected," he thought. At this moment, his mobile phone suddenly rang. Picking it up, John saw that Max was calling him back. "Hey, John, what happened? I saw that you left an urgent message for me to call." John quickly summarized what had just happened. "By any chance, will you be in the office tomorrow?" "I know tomorrow is Saturday," but Max laughed, interrupting him. "Yes, I will be there tomorrow. You know what they say, a man who works for himself has the toughest boss. Why don't you come by at 10 o'clock and we'll figure out what to do?" Still in a state of devastation from his encounter with Martina, John leaned back on the sofa. The thought of cooking dinner was too much for him, and the prospect of eating alone was even worse. On impulse, he called, "Allison, hello. It ended much earlier than I expected. Maybe I can invite you three to dinner." "Can Kyle still stay the night?" she asked. Stevie is really looking forward to it, and so is Kyle. Yes, of course, it's not a problem if only you don't mind. Honestly, I just don't want to dine alone. Then come to us. I've prepared enough food so it won't be difficult. The prospect of a home-cooked meal, the opportunity to spend more time with Kyle and relax in a family environment was too tempting for John to pass up. If you're sure it won't cause any inconvenience, that'll be just fine. When should I arrive? He heard Selena's flash in her voice. Come as soon as you can. These two little Indians have already turned everything upside down. Dinner went off without any awkwardness. Neither Kyle nor Stevie were surprised that Kyle's father had joined them, and John and Allison avoided talking about the unpleasant situation. After dinner, the boys went to Stevie's room to build a fort in which they planned to sleep. Although Allison refused, John insisted on helping put away the dishes. When the cleaning was finished, the adults sat down at the small kitchen table and sipped wine from the bottle John had brought. "Do you want to tell me what's happening to you?" Allison asked. John was hesitant, but he really wanted to share what happened with someone. He soon described the whole painful story, starting with Claire's unexpected visit to the bank. Allison listened calmly until John explained all the details of what happened. "I just can't imagine how you feel right now. It seems to me that Martina has taken quite a beating on you over the past few months, and I understand why you wanted to be with Kyle tonight. The thought of losing Stevie would be absolutely terrifying to me." He gave her a martyr's look, and she hastened to continue. "But the fact that she is willing to share custody of Kyle sounds reassuring. So, even though divorce isn't what you wanted, maybe things will turn out better than you think. At least I hope so." "Thank you, Allison. I hope things get better, but to be honest, I feel like I'm drowning. It's like a constant drip of problems that I stupidly ignored, and then suddenly a flood hits me. Now my life is in the water, and I'm just floundering helplessly." She reached out and squeezed his hand, and he forced himself to smile at her. "Anyway, thanks for letting me come over tonight." He gestured to the house around them. "Now this all seems like the only normal thing in my life." Suddenly his tone changed. "I almost forgot. Would it be okay if Kyle stayed here until noon or so? I have an appointment with a lawyer tomorrow at 10 a.m. "Of course," she replied. "He can stay as long as necessary." She looked at him with approval. "I must say, Kyle is a very well-mannered boy. You raised him well." He was pleased to finally hear something positive. The next morning, John met Max Hardison in the latter's office at 10 o'clock sharp, and the lawyer was ready to go. "Give me a chance to review her petition and my proposed financial statement while you go get a decent cup of coffee at your neighborhood coffee shop. What we cook here is simply terrible." When John returned with coffee, Max had already finished his review. His reaction took John by surprise. "Do you want my advice?" asked Max. "Sign this today, and I will send it to Martina's lawyer as soon as possible." "Is it true?" "Not a single point of contention. Nothing for negotiations." Max shook his head. "Honestly, this can be used as a model for those who want an amicable divorce." John shook his head in disbelief. "After she was so cunning and deceitful, I find it hard to trust her. John, I think this is a special case where your interests and her interests coincide. My guess is that your soon-to-be ex wants to marry in Jersel as soon as the divorce is finalized. She doesn't want you to drag this out another day longer, so she tries her best to be fair. It's ironic that even though she filed for divorce, you're the one who has the upper hand, because she's in such a hurry. I guess that's why she gives you everything you wanted. Joint custody, joint child support, no child support, and you can live in the house until you sell it, in which case you split any profits. We have nothing more to demand. Look, I know you're mad that she cheated, and I know you think she deserves some kind of punishment. But the law doesn't work that way, so don't cut the branch you're sitting on. Sign the deal before someone convinces her to demand more." Wow, I never thought I would hear that from Hardison. Yes. Well, I also never thought that I would give such advice, but here we are. So sign the deal. John signed. He then declined his lawyer's offer to have lunch. "If only you could invoice me for that, plus the time for the watch," he told Max with a smile. "You're damn right you would," Max grinned, "especially since you got off so easy with me in this matter. Next time, bring me something controversial that requires a lot of billable hours." When he got to his car, John quickly called Allison to ask if she and the boys wanted to have a picnic. I finished with the lawyer a lot faster than I expected. John told her, so I thought we could grab some food and eat in the park. That sounds great, she said, and it will save me from having to cook again. I hope it's good news that your meeting went so quickly, she added. It is, he assured her. I'll tell you everything at lunch. The picnic turned out to be a great success. After eating their sandwiches, the boys began to burn off excess energy by chasing ducks around the pond and playing in the playground. John and Allison found a bench under the shade of a tree where they could watch the two babies as they finished their food. So everything went well with your lawyer, she asked. Surprisingly good, John said. The offer she made was so fair and balanced that Max told me he'd never seen anything like it. Why would she do that? Feels guilty. Max thinks she's playing good cop because she wants to settle things as quickly as possible. He believes she will try to get an expedited ruling so the 3-month waiting period can begin immediately. The only reason he can think of is that she wants to marry her boss as soon as possible. An affair with the boss. What a banal conspiracy. She shook her head. Doesn't she know how bad the prognosis is for such a relationship? Then she smiled and grabbed his hand. But whether it works for her or not, it seems like it will be the best possible outcome for you, all things considered. I know, he nodded, and I should be grateful. But I still don't like what this will do to Kyle. And I'm still angry that Martina and Ivan could ruin a 9-year marriage without any consequences, just because they were too horny to keep it in their pants. I understand, John, but the main thing is that you can now focus on you and Kayla and not worry about Martina and her affairs. This is also worth something. Yes, you're right. After a day at the park, Kyle was exhausted when John brought him home. They had an early dinner, and then John put his son to bed. Returning to the living room, he decided to call Martina to leave her a voicemail. To his surprise, she answered, I called to let you know that I have reviewed your settlement proposal with my attorney and have signed it as is. His office couried it to your lawyer's office this afternoon so he can file it and begin the process on Monday. This is great, she said, relief evident in her voice. There's no reason why this can't be finished in 3 months. John remained silent. In the meantime, she continued, I wanted you to know that for the near future, I will be living at the Peach Tree, intermediate stay residence. Triple I provides an apartment there for visiting clients, and the company offered to let me stay there until I could find permanent housing. I wonder who allowed this. John thought bitterly. She continued, now that I have a semi-permanent place to live, I think it's time for us to start alternating weeks with Kyle so he can start to get used to our new routine. If you take him to school on Monday morning, I will pick him up that afternoon and take him home with me. That way we can get into a routine pretty easily. John gritted his teeth at the thought of being away from Kyle for a whole week. But it could have been much worse, he reminded himself. Okay, he replied, but there's one more thing. Since you're the one who filed for divorce, I think you should be the one to tell Kyle what's going on. The line went silent for a few seconds. Okay, she finally said, I'll explain it to him. He'll be fine. Kids are resilient. It took John a lot of effort not to shout at her. How can she be so indifferent to the fact that she's ruining the only family life Kyle has ever known? If she thinks he'll be okay with this, then she's crazy. But he again held back, not wanting to jeopardize the agreement that had been reached. On Sunday evening, Martin called and asked to speak to Kyle. When the conversation ended, John asked him what she said. Oh, she just wanted to tell me that she's picking me up from school tomorrow and we'll have an adventure to a cool new place. There's even a swimming pool there. Kyle then looked at his father. Are you going to? John sighed. Damn bitch, she didn't tell him anything. Nobody, I can't come. Okay, Kyle said, leaving his father to curse under his breath. When he dropped Kyle off at school on Monday, he made sure the boy had a change of clothes packed in his bag. As Kyle slowly walked towards the school entrance, John felt like he was losing his son forever. Later that day, at the time he usually picked up his son, his mood worsened further. To cheer himself up, he went to dinner at a restaurant that he had long wanted to try. The food was good, but John couldn't get rid of his dark thoughts. So this is what my new life will be like. He was just finishing his second beer when it suddenly dawned on him. All this time, I was immersed in a showdown with Martina and trying to arrange Kyle's life. But now I have time to deal with Ivan and Gersel. This scoundrel should not get away with it after destroying my marriage and my family. Now he felt a new sense of purpose. I have photos, videos, and transcripts that prove this bastard's treason. I'm sure his wife will want to know about this. The next day he called the Ingersoll house, and hearing a woman's voice introduced himself. "Mrs. Ingersoll, I have important information to share with you. When can I come this week to discuss this? Are you selling something?" She asked suspiciously. "No, madam." "Are you asking for a donation?" "No, madam. This is a personal matter information that I think it will be useful for you to know." "I'd rather not discuss this over the phone," she sighed heavily. "Okay, come see me tomorrow afternoon. But you better not try to sell me anything." "No, madam, under no circumstances. See you tomorrow at 13 o'clock. The next day, when he drove up to the address she indicated, he saw a mansion surrounded by a high brick wall. To get inside, he had to wait until he was let in through the gate. The house itself was a large 2-story Georgian-style building with a brick and stone facade. When John rang the doorbell, the maid showed him inside and led him to the drawing room or salon. He could not say exactly what it was. Mrs. Ingersoll sat on the leather sofa waiting for him. She was an elegant woman, and John realized that she had been a beauty in her time. She was probably 10 to 15 years older than her husband, he guessed. "Well, Mr. Meadows, I'm Nadia Ingersoll. Why are you here?" she asked sharply. "Mrs. Ingersoll, I'll get straight to the point. My wife works in your husband's consulting business. I regret to inform you that she and your husband have been involved in a romantic relationship for several months now." He picked up the package the private detective had sent him. "There's photographic evidence here if you'd like to take a look," he explained, handing the package to her. She looked at him for a moment and then laughed. "Oh my God, another one. I don't understand you, Mrs. Ingersoll." She shook her head as if she were talking about a naughty child. "Ivan does this from time to time. Some girl with an itch in her panties will start hitting on him, and they will have a whirlwind romance. This usually lasts 3 to 4 months, and then he leaves her heartbroken until the next one comes along. It's all very predictable. And you're okay with that?" John struggled to understand. "Why not? It doesn't mean anything. If Ivan has an affair for several months, this means that I will have to spend less time with him. Besides, he always ends up coming back to me." John was stunned. "But isn't this threatening your marriage? What if he falls in love with this girl?" Now her face became serious. "There is something you need to know, young man. Ivan is a very smart man, and he made Triple I a ton of money. He may be the public face of the business, but I am the owner, the only owner. Ivan knows full well that if he wants to continue rubbing shoulders with industry power brokers and impressing mere mortals with his one-liners, he better remember who holds the purse." Suddenly, John heard a child's voice begin to shout. "Mom, Mom," and a boy ran into the room. At the same moment, Mrs. Ingersoll's demeanor changed. "Rodney, come here, my dear. Well done. Say hello to Mr. Meadows, who came to visit me." "Hello, Mr. Meadows," the boy repeated obediently, and John now saw that Rodney, he actually appeared to be a teenager, had the characteristic flat face and slanted eyes of Down syndrome. A wave of pity washed over him. But Nadia Ingersoll hugged her son and cooed to him affectionately. Then she turned around and looked at John. "And now you understand why there are more important things in my life than Ivan's petty adventures." She turned to her son again. "Okay, Rodney, it's time to go back to the nanny. I'll come see you soon, okay?" "Okay, Mom," he replied and walked up to the nanny, who appeared at the door. When the boy was gone, Mrs. Ingersoll stood up and John did the same. "So, Mr. Meadows, I'm sorry that my philandering husband confused your wife, but honestly, she should have known better. Either way, in 3 or 4 months, he'll be done with her. And she'll probably come crawling back to you, if you still want her. Mrs. Ingersoll, you should know that your husband's affair with my wife has already been going on for more than 4 months, as far as I can tell. I think they are discussing marriage." "Oh, really?" she said casually. "Well, this isn't the first time he's done this. When this happens, I just need to tighten his chain a little to remind him who's boss. In any case, I promise that I will monitor the situation over the next few months. In the meantime, here's your evidence back. I don't need the dirty details of his dealings. And now, goodbye, sir." With these words, she left in the same direction where Rodney went, and John could only leave the house himself and get into the car in a state of daze. "It seems to me that I have just escaped from a madhouse," he thought. What a strange, loveless family where the husband is allowed to sleep with whomever he wants, even if his wife has absolute power over him. But don't say devoid of love. She obviously loves her poor son. As he drove back to the city, embarrassment gradually gave way to disappointment. I can't believe she doesn't care what her husband does or who he sleeps with. It's like he's some kind of sexy secret agent with a license to cheat. How can I take revenge on such a person? His mood only worsened when he noticed a voicemail from Martina. "Listen, I suddenly have to leave town, so you need to pick up Kyle from school and keep him at your place for the night, okay? Bye." He hit the steering wheel with his palm. Damn it. Martina has me hooked. She knows that I want to spend as much time with Kyle as possible and uses this to dump her responsibilities on me. Once again, these two traitors can do whatever they want without worrying about the consequences. When he pulled up to the school that day, Kyle was happy to see him. But as his father buckled him into the back seat, he asked, "I thought Mommy was going to pick me up today." Yeah, she was going to, but then she had to leave town. "So I came to get you," John explained. "Will you take me to Mom's new apartment?" "No, we'll just go back to our house." After that, Kyle thought about it and asked with uncertainty, "Dad, why don't you live in Mom's new apartment? Let's talk about this when we get home." John avoided answering. Damn it, she still hasn't told him about the divorce. She swore that she would explain it to him. And now this task fell to me. They pulled into the driveway and entered the house, John leading his son into the living room. "Kyle, I need to explain something to you. Mom now has a new apartment because she doesn't want to live with me anymore." "Does this mean you're getting a divorce?" Kyle asked, his voice trembling. How does he know about the divorce? The kids at school probably talked about it. "Yes, that's right. Mom is going to divorce me." "No," Kyle shouted. "I don't want you to get a divorce. Other kids say it's bad." John hugged his son and then pulled back to look at him. "I know Kyle and I didn't want us to get a divorce either. But there is one thing you must understand. First of all, my divorce from my mom has nothing to do with you or what you did. We both love you more than anything in the world, and always will. It's just that sometimes adults decide they don't want to live together anymore. And that's what your mom wants. I understand that this is a big change. This is a big change for me too. But our job is to deal with it as best we can, you know." Kyle nodded doubtfully, and it was obvious that his tears were about to fall. Desperately, John tried to think of something that could divert the boy's attention to something positive. Then he had an idea. "Stay here, Kyle. I need to make a quick call." With that, he dialed Allison's number and prayed that she would be in touch. "Hi, this is John. I know this is unexpected, but would you and Stevie want to have dinner with us? Kyle is with me today and is a little depressed about his divorce, so I thought meeting you might cheer him up." When she said they were free, he asked her to come as soon as possible. After she agreed and hung up, John turned to Kyle. "Did you hear, buddy? Stevie and his mom are coming over for dinner." Kyle immediately cheered up, and John sighed with relief. The crisis was averted. Later, after they all ate the food they brought, the boys went to Kyle's room to play. Freed from the responsibility of keeping an eye on the children, John and Allison walked into the living room. "Looks like you had a whirlwind day," Allison noted. "What's happened? I thought Kyle would be with his mother this week." "Stormy, you can't even imagine half of it," John replied. And with these words, he told her about his disappointment after visiting Mrs. Ingersoll about the unexpected voice message from Martina, and finally about Kyle's almost tears when he learned about his parents' divorce. "Honestly, you and Stevie just saved us. Not only did you lift Kyle's spirits, you lifted my spirits as well. I'm still upset about Martina and Ivan, but at least I haven't thought about them since you came." She smiled, but then her eyes narrowed. "So what's the problem? Do you still have feelings for Martina? Is that what's bothering you?" His response was immediate. "No, absolutely not. After finding out how she lied, cheated, and used me, there's no question of any love for her." Then he dropped. "But what really bothers me is that he and Ivan can do all this without any regard for me or Kyle. It's just unfair." She came and sat down next to him. Looking into his eyes, she said, "John, you are a good person. You are a good husband to your wife, and you are a good father to your son. Through no fault of your own, you have become a victim of people who acted dishonestly. But the way to respond is not to wallow in victimhood, but to move forward and do the best you can under the circumstances. That's what I tried to do with my ex, and I think that's the path you should take too." He looked at her silently, then nodded. "I know you're right, Allison. I admire you for the way you deal with difficulties, and I too want to be as strong and determined. But I can't help but hope for some kind of balance, some kind of payback so that the bad guys don't win. I understand. Just don't let it stop you from enjoying the happiness that your good behavior can create." He smiled. Suddenly he raised his head and looked around. "Hey, I just realized I can't hear the boys. We better go check out what they're doing." The adults walked down the hallway, and when they looked into Kyle's room, they saw 2 kids fast asleep in a pillow fort. "I better wake up Stevie," Allison said. "Tomorrow is a school day, and he'll be up late by the time I get him home." "Wait," John said, gently pulling her out into the hallway. "I have an idea. It would be easier to leave him here overnight and wake him up a little earlier in the morning. You stay too. You can take the master bedroom, and I'll sleep on the couch." She chuckled. "Are you trying to take advantage of me, John Meadows?" He raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "No way. Hey, you're the one who said I'm a good and decent person. Besides, I'm still a married man for at least a couple more months. But seriously, this is the simplest solution." She finally agreed, and all 4 of them ended up getting a good night's sleep. As for John, it almost felt like his family was under one roof again, and Allison fell asleep smiling, smelling his cologne on his pillow. The next couple of months were a roller coaster for John. Having Kyle one week and being single the next created a bipolar life. During the weeks that Kyle was with him, John lived in fear of any changes that might disrupt his daily routine. A runny nose, a parent-teacher conference, some extracurricular activity. All of this could completely disrupt John's carefully planned schedule. In some ways, the free week seemed even more insidious. Martina's job seemed to change on a whim, and she fully expected John to pick up when Kyle's school schedule became inconvenient. The only thing that made John's life acceptable was Allison. She seemed always available and always willing to help, whether it was picking up Kyle from school, organizing a last-minute sleepover, or simply making dinner for an exhausted father and his hungry son. John was not at all surprised when he heard one of the teachers after school call Allison Kyle's second mom. 2 things kept John from developing a deeper relationship with Allison. First, he felt awkward starting dating while he was still technically married. It's no surprise that he marked the date of the final divorce on his calendar. Now there were only a few days left. Another factor that held him back was his disappointment with Martina and Ivan. Every time he tried to restore justice, his efforts ended in failure. I spent a lot of money on a detective to gather evidence of Martina's infidelity, and when I presented it to her, she trumped it with her divorce papers. No remorse, no apology, just "I'm leaving." My attempt to warn Ivan's wife was no less unsuccessful. Not only was Nadia aware of her husband's affairs, she didn't even care. Her life revolves around taking care of poor Rodney. From her point of view, Ivan can do whatever he wants. So basically, all my efforts came to nothing, while my ex and her lover continue to enjoy their lives. During one of his single weeks, John was working in his home office when he noticed packages that Lyman Mazarov had sent him. Until now, he had followed the private investigators' advice not to watch the video. Seeing them enjoying life doesn't make me feel better. But now John decided to pull out the transcript and look at it. Maybe there's something in there I can use. He spent the last evening of his marriage to Martina reading a dry transcript of her time in bed with Ivan. The text was a slow, uncomfortable read, and the deeper he delved into it, the more pessimistic he became about finding anything useful. He had almost reached the end when one of the lovers' conversations after sex attracted his attention. He reread the text again slowly, trying to think through all the consequences. And in the process, he began to feel a growing sense of delight. I think this might be what I've been looking for. When he finished, he spent some time thinking about how best to use what he had learned. By making a copy of the relevant pages and highlighting the section he thought would have the greatest impact, he felt more confident. For the first time in a long time, he went to bed in an optimistic mood. The next day, everything started to fall apart. While doing his morning checklist at work, John heard his smartphone beep for an incoming text. He didn't recognize the number, but still opened the message. It turned out to be completely unexpected and contained only one line. The chain is tight, hard. Please. Not knowing what this meant, he was about to call Nadia to find out, but then his boss called him on a question. By the time John satisfied his boss's demands and completed all the extra work, it was well past noon. He hurried across the street to Subway for a quick bite. Usually the lunch crowd had already left, and he was the only customer in the place. As he sat eating his sandwich at the yellow table, Claire Garrison walked in and sat down opposite him. John braced himself for another tirade, but it was another woman who was now sitting in front of him. Instead of an angry look, a sly grin appeared on her face. "Your people told me I could find you here. How can I help you, Claire?" he asked carefully. She leaned back on the bench and crossed her arms, regarding him with new respect. Well, it seems I underestimated you. You are like the wheels of justice." Seeing his confusion, she continued, They spin slowly, but they grind extremely finely." "Claire, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't act naive, John Meadows. You finally got even with Martina. She was fired today." It was obvious that she was enjoying the message. As I heard, Ivan called her into his office, said that her work was not up to the level, and gave her a kick in the ass. She left the building carrying only a box of personal belongings. John looked at her in amazement. Ivan did this, but I thought they were going to get married. Claire was overjoyed and she thought so, but obviously that won't happen. In fact, Ivan's secretary told me that Martina must vacate the III long-term apartment by the end of the week. She nodded approvingly at him. "I don't know how, but you certainly gave your ex a great time. She's without a job, out of Ivan's life, and without a place to live, all this at one moment." She then smiled a predatory smile. What else? Once the other consultants in Atlanta find out she was fired for poor performance, she'll probably have to leave town to find a new job. Claire stood up and nodded again. "Like I said, when you finally get going, you keep grinding until there's almost nothing left. I'm definitely impressed." Then she left. Back at the bank, John was still enjoying the news an hour later when he received a call from Martina. Without waiting for a hello, she began to talk in a crying voice about how cruelly Ivan had treated her. He quickly interrupted her. "I know all about it, Martina." Claire came in early to tell me all the dirty details. Instantly, Martina's mood and tone changed. "That bitch," she screamed so loudly that John pulled the phone away from his ear. "I bet she was gloating, and you probably were too." John remained silent. He heard her take a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. "It doesn't matter. You can't kick me harder than I kick myself," she sighed. "But it is what it is, and now I need to find a new job. In fact, I have already arranged an interview with one company that is interested. The only bad thing is that it's in Seattle. I plan to fly there next week to talk to them. But until I find something," she continued, "you and I will have to renegotiate our financial agreement. My severance package from Triple, I won't last long, so I'll need the money. And if I have to move, there will be additional costs for moving, accommodation, and so on. In fact, I may need child support for quite some time until I can support myself again." He couldn't help but smile. "I must disappoint you, Martina, but there will be no revision. If you look at the calendar, you will see that our divorce was finalized yesterday. From now on, you go your way and I go mine. Damn, I completely forgot about that." She cursed. She was silent for some time, clearly trying to cope with the new information. Finally, she tried to change the subject. "Be that as it may, I need somewhere to live for a while, because Ivan kicked me out of the apartment. So I'm going to go back to our house until I get settled. Let me save you the trouble, Martina. According to our agreement, you no longer live here. The house is mine until I decide to sell it, and I don't have to share it with you. And do yourself a favor. Don't try to get in while I'm gone. I've changed all the locks. But what should I do? Where should I live? This Martina is no longer my problem." He heard her muttering something under her breath, and thought she was about to explode. Instead, she changed the subject again. "We still need to talk about Kyle. We agreed on joint custody. I'm glad you finally remembered your son," he said sarcastically. "But you don't have to worry about him. Kyle is used to changes in his life. He's doing well in school, has made new friends, and lives in a stable environment. And considering that you are essentially homeless and planning to move to another city, I would say that joint custody is no longer an option. Maybe later, when you move, we can talk about him visiting you. I'll be happy to discuss it." Then his voice became threatening. "But don't even think about asking for full custody. Throughout our separation and divorce, Kyle spent much more time with me. I kept a record of every time I had to pick him up and keep him, because your job was more important. I doubt any judge would award custody to a parent who has been absent from their child's life for so long." He heard her sobbing into the phone. "I can't believe you're so heartless, John. I didn't think you were like that. You shouldn't be surprised, Martina. After all, I learned it from you." With these words, he passed out and sat there thinking, "I have to admit I don't feel any sympathy for her at all." Reflecting on his conversation with Martina, he remembered that he had important business. Picking up his phone again, he opened the text he'd received from Nadia in Jersel that morning. "Thank you," he wrote in response. "Now it's my turn to do you a favor. Can I come tomorrow?" She only responded towards the end of the day. "I don't have much time, but I can meet you if you come at 13 o'clock tomorrow," he quickly confirmed. After that, John left work a little early to pick up Kyle. The two of them were waiting in the parking lot after school when Allison pulled up to pick up Stevie. With a wide smile on his face, John walked decisively towards her car. When she came out to greet him, he grabbed her and kissed her deeply. The teachers who were watching laughed and clapped. Stevie and Kyle also watched this and were shocked by what they saw. "Daddy kissed Mommy," Kyle explained to his friend. This brought smiles to both John and Allison. The latter turned to him again. "Not that I mind, but what has gotten into you?" John smiled. "First of all, from today I am officially a free man. Secondly, I think my schizophrenic life is about to get a lot easier. I'll tell you the details later, but how about we all go out to dinner and celebrate?" This proposal caused even more joy and smiles, although the boys did not quite understand what exactly they were celebrating. Returning home from dinner at the family restaurant, John told Allison about the day's events while the boys played. "The biggest news is that Martina will probably move to the West Coast and leave Kyle here with me. I'm not saying everything will be smooth sailing from now on, but most of the chaos in my life will go away." He took her hand, "And I hope that you and Stevie will allow me to spend a lot of my new chaos free time with you. First, I would like you to spend the night here again." He lowered his voice so only Allison could hear. "Only this time, I don't want to sleep on the couch." She took his face in her hands and kissed him. "That's very good news indeed, John. And yes, I'd really like to stay here." When the boys were finally asleep, John led Allison into the master bedroom. Dimming the light, he began to undress her. When he was finished, he quickly took off his clothes, then picked them up and laid them on his bed. The next afternoon, John headed to the Ingersoll estate. When he rang the doorbell, Nadia herself was waiting for him. When they sat down, she began as usual in a sharp tone. "I did not expect to see you again, Mr. Meadows. I kept my promise, as you undoubtedly know, so why did you come today? Mrs. Ingersoll, it was obvious to me last time I came that you love your son very much. Of course I do. Rodney means everything to me. Is it true that he has Down syndrome?" "Yes," she replied defensively, "but that in no way affects my feelings for him. That was obvious to me too," he nodded, and then continued, "I read about it. As far as I understand, children with Down syndrome can now expect to live a long life. Right?" "Yes," she answered warily, "but of course he will need support for the rest of his life." "That's true, and if you're wondering, I've made sure he gets that support." John nodded. "Pardon me for asking, Mrs. Ingersoll, but are you older than your husband?" "I'm not ashamed to say that I'm 14 years older than Ivan. Frankly, he wanted a partner with the financial resources to support his ambitions, and thanks to my inheritance, I fit the bill. Likewise, as a widow who was still young and attractive, I wanted an attractive companion who would be my match. It was a marriage of convenience, but it suited both of us." Statistically, of course, John continued, it's likely that you will die before your husband. I know actuarial calculations, Mr. Meadows, so what? And the possibility of a fatal illness or accident cannot be ruled out. I am well aware that I am not immortal, Mr. Meadows. What are you getting at? I'm just saying that at some point in the future, it is likely that Ivan will take full responsibility for Rodney's care. Yes, she admitted after a short pause. John took a piece of paper from his inner jacket pocket. Mrs. Ingersolla, you said that you had no need to examine the evidence I had collected about your husband's affair with my wife. But I think it's very important that you read this. This is a page from the transcript of their time together. The section I highlighted is about Rodney. With caution, she took the piece of paper from his hands and began to read. Martina Meadows, when we get married, I will think about asking for full custody of Kyle. Do you mind, Ivan Ingersolla? Of course. If you educate, I'm not very good at this dad thing. Martina Meadows, what about Rodney? Do you want custody of him? Ivan Ingersolla, God, no, have you seen him? The child is damaged. Nadia adores him, but if it were all up to me, I would send him to a boarding school in no time. Nadia gasped in shock. You can see why I had to share this with you, Mrs. Ingersolla. I saw how much you loved your son and felt that you should know what the future might hold for him when you are no longer around to protect him. Apparently shocked, the woman took a minute to pull herself together. When she finally succeeded, she stood up. John followed suit. Holding the transcript in one hand, she extended the other to shake his hand. Mr. Meadows, you really did me a great favor. Please leave my house so I can think about how best to handle this situation. All the best, Mrs. Ingersolla, and good luck to you and Rodney. John replied before turning and walking away. As he drove back to work, he kept thinking, I don't know what's on this woman's mind, but I wouldn't want to be in Ivan Ingersolla's shoes. The answer to his question came 3 weeks later, and for the third time, the source was none other than Claire Garrison. This time, she called John and started talking before he could say hello. Remind me never to cross your path. John, when you take revenge, you create a real nuclear explosion. What is it this time, Claire? I guess you already know that the real owner of Triple I is Nadia Ingersolla. I know, he admitted cautiously. So this morning, Nadia came to the office and gathered everyone for an important announcement. And guess who was missing, Ivan? Anyway, she told us that Triple I had been sold to a large consulting firm in New York. Our new owners will fly in tomorrow to tell us which of us will be kept at work and which of us will be fired. Wow, John exclaimed. I definitely didn't expect this. Yes, sure, Claire retorted sarcastically, but that's not all. Nadia also said that Ivan was fired for violating the corporate sexual harassment policy. She and Ivan are divorcing, and she said that she was going to devote herself to caring for her son, Rodney. So what will happen to Ivan? As John, honestly, I think he's gone. Nadia made a specific statement that their pen-up-shall agreement stipulated that he would receive very little from their divorce. As for his search for a new job, no one would hire someone with a reputation tarnished by sexual harassment. And I don't see any venture capitalist investing in the new business that Ivan might try to open. She giggled. If you want my opinion, he'll probably end up working as a barista at Starbucks. Interesting. What about you, Claire? Are you going to try to get back together with him? Well, he's kind of lost his appeal, if you know what I mean, she admitted. What about Triple I? Will you stay if the new owners offer you a job? I think not, she said after a pause. Honestly, I don't know why I stayed after Ivan left me. I'll probably look elsewhere. She laughed. Maybe I'll go to Seattle and try to team up with Martina again. At least now we have something in common. We're both Ivan's exes. Well, I wish you luck, John told her. After he hung up, he added, and I wouldn't be sorry if you left town. He then sat back, enjoying the news. Claire thinks I'm cool because I made Martina and Ivan pay for what they did. And probably I really played a big role in their downfall. But she was wrong about one thing. The person you really shouldn't piss off is Nadia Ingersoll. By the following summer, John and Allison were married. He gave her a ring for Christmas, and she accepted his proposal. In January, when Allison's lease was up, she and Stevie moved into John's house. The couple held a small wedding ceremony in John's garden on the first day of spring. As for Martina, since she called him after her dismissal, John has never seen or heard from her. So he was surprised when she unexpectedly showed up on his doorstep one Saturday morning in August. He almost didn't recognize her. She looked tired. Gray strands appeared in her dark hair. "Martina, what are you doing here?" he asked. "I went back to town for a couple of days to sign some papers. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I'd like to see Kyle." Reluctantly, John led her into the house and followed his son. When he returned with Kyle, Martina looked at the boy in surprise. "Wow, you've grown so much. You are a real young man." Then, seeing his hesitation, she knelt down and extended her hands to him. "Don't you remember me?" Before the boy could answer, Stevie entered the room. Seeing Martina, he asked Kyle in a whisper, "Who is this?" "It's old Mom," Kyle replied. Her words struck Martina to the core. Rising quickly, she turned away from her son to hide her tears. "Maybe I should go, John. I don't want to upset him. I think it's better this way." John agreed and walked her to the door. Before she got into the car, she turned around and looked at her ex-husband with a sad smile. "Looks like you're doing well, John. I promise I won't bother your life anymore. I just hope you remember the good times when you think of me." She waited a moment, but he didn't say anything. She quickly turned around, got into the rental car, and drove away. He watched her car disappear when Allison stepped out next to him. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. He turned to her. "Yes, everything is fine." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, it's funny. Her appearance reminded me of a business lecture I heard about bankruptcy." She looked at him in disbelief. "Our professor told us that when Ernest Hemingway was asked how he ended up bankrupt, he replied, 'Gradually, and then suddenly.' I think the same thing happened with Martina and Ivan. For a while, it seemed like they could do whatever they wanted and never suffer any consequences. But things happened that they never noticed. When everything collapsed, there was nothing they could do to prevent it." He put his arm around her shoulder and stroked her belly, which was just beginning to round out. "I think the same applies to us, only in reverse. We both went through a long period of difficulties, but good things happened, even if they were sometimes hard to see. And then, suddenly, everything worked out for the best." She nodded and he kissed her. "Let's go inside and see what the boys are doing. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.